Hello and welcome to a new episode of Coptic Las. In today's lecture, we're going to continue with the quarter 3. Now we've finished all the letters of the Coptic alphabet. We learned words for all of them. We learned the pronunciation rule for all of them too. And now we're going to shift to a new concept in this part of the curriculum. And this concept is identifying Greek versus Coptic. This would be part of two lectures. The first one is covered here, and then there will be a follow-up video for the second part on the Greek versus Coptic discussion because it's a little long. So since we're starting a whole new area in our curriculum, I always like to give you some motivation. Why are we learning Greek versus Coptic words? So if we remember together back from what we've learned in the previous quarters and the first few lectures of this quarter, we have seen bunch of Coptic letters that actually have different pronunciation for Greek words versus Coptic words. And so back when we're teaching that portion, we talked a lot about how you're not required to know if this word is Coptic or Greek, and I will always tell you. But now we're in this part of the lecture where we no longer need to tell you all the time, and there will be some still situations where I still have to tell you if the word is Coptic or Greek, because even with all those rules that determine if a word is Coptic or Greek, they're not 100% cover all the words, and you still have to refer to some Coptic dictionary for some of the words to know if they're Greek or Coptic. You will never have to look up the word in a Coptic dictionary for this part of the curriculum. So if it's something you cannot recognize with those rules, I will tell you if it's Coptic or Greek, so you don't have to look on the dictionary. But just FYI. This is how it works. And so the reason why we're learning this, because there's 3 letters that we talked about that have different pronunciation in Coptic versus Greek. One of them is Sima, which is always S in Coptic or Greek words, except if it's followed by a Mi, then it becomes a Z sound. Then we talked about Taf, which is always a T in all Coptic and all Greek words, except for Greek words that have an E before the Taf, in which case the Taf takes on a D sound instead of a T. And finally we talked about Ki, which was one of the letters that makes 3 sounds. For Greek words it could either be Kha sound as in khair, or it could be SH as in shy or shake for Greek words. And then if the word is Coptic, it will always be a K. And so because of those 3 letters, and they show up in a lot of words, they may show up in Coptic words, they may show up in Greek words, we have to start this whole discussion about Greek versus Coptic so that you're able to identify how to pronounce each of those 3 letters. With that said, there is way more rules than you would ever recognize, and I will not expect you to memorize those rules or know them to the full extent possible, because it's going to be overwhelming, and in all honesty, it's stuff that you will get with experience. But for the sake of completion, and because this curriculum is intended to more than just teach you Coptic pronunciation and reading, but actually teaches you the fundamentals of the language, we have to cover all the exceptions and all the things like these rules in so much detail, just for the sake of completion. But there will be some few rules that you will find that you will memorize a lot, and they will get you over, I would assume, 80% of all the words that you will see, and you'll be able to identify Coptic or Greek without going to the nitty-gritty of some of those rules. But again, in this lecture, we're going to cover all of them for the sake of completion, because I want you to get a complete picture of the Coptic language and not just learning what you need to get by. I want you to actually have the theoretical foundation and the theoretical Coptic knowledge that comes out of this curriculum and that you will not find in many other curriculums available online or at churches. So appreciate that learning experience, take from it as much as you can, and don't worry if some of the rules fell through or you don't recognize them. When you do the homework and exercises, you'll be much better at them. So with that, I can wrap up the introduction and start talking about Greek versus Coptic. So there's some Coptic word heuristics, and then there's some Greek word heuristics. I always like to start with the Coptic ones, because Coptic ones is much easier than the Greek. The Greek gets so involved with so many rules, but Coptic is very straightforward. If you get the Coptic with the 2 exceptions, you're golden. And then Greek is a whole kind of word. that we'll get to when we get to it in this lecture too. So, Coptic words heuristic. If you remember way back in first quarter, when we talked about how there are many letters in the Coptic language, 32 of them, and we talked about how the last 7 out of those 32 letters are actually not coming from Greek, but coming from the old Demotic language or the ancient Egyptian language, and those 7 letters are only specific to Coptic words because they make sounds that are not available in the Greek language. So, with that, you could guess a word would be of a Coptic origin if it has any of those last 7 Demotic letters, which is Shai, Phi, Chai, Hori was an exception, Janja, Shima, Ti was an exception. Okay, so some of them are very straightforward. If you ever see a Shai, if you ever see a Phi, if you ever see a Chai, 100% of the time, always, it must be a Coptic word. There is no way on earth it will be Greek word. Now, with Hori, we come to the first exception. And that first exception is that for Greek words, some of them use this little, looks like an apostrophe, but like looking the other way. And that apostrophe is called rough breathing in Greek, and it makes an H sound. So instead of importing this and adding to the Greek letters, since we already need to capture the H sound in Coptic for the rough breathing as well, where you just put the Hori for that rough breathing, and then it will make the H sound still because Hori makes an H. So why add more letters if you can capture it in Coptic letter? And so this is why if the word has a Hori in it, it may not be necessarily a Coptic word, of Coptic origin I mean, but more likely than not it will be of Coptic origin, okay? So here's an exception, okay? So one of the exceptions is the word Hirini, okay? So Hirini starts with a Hori, and it's actually, even though it starts with a Hori, it's Greek, not Coptic, and it just has the Hori to take away the place of the rough breathing, like we talked. This is a very good exception for that rule. And Hirini means beast, for anyone who wants to know. Then Janja is an always. Shima is also 100% of the time. Then comes to the T. T, the exception for it is that sometimes the letter T by itself is used as something called the feminine definite article. This is little grammar. I'm just going to go a quick grammar and then come back to this, okay? So, in English, it's much better because you know of the definite article za in English and indefinite article a in English as well. And it's very straightforward. You put a za, definite, a, indefinite. Those are the articles. In Coptic, it's more complicated because the article, it changes based if it's masculine, feminine, singular, or plural. So, for the feminine definite article, like za, in front of a feminine noun, you put the T. And so the feminine noun might be of Greek origin, but it will start with the T at the beginning because that makes the feminine article, definite article za. And so ktisis, creation, when you put a T before it, take ktisis, it becomes za, creation. So ktisis, without the T, is Greek, but it has T in front of it as a feminine definite article, and therefore you might think it's Coptic because it has a T, but it's not, it's Greek. This is a definite article, not actually because it's a Coptic word. So be very careful of this, know about those exceptions. So to recap and finish the Coptic discussion, any word that will have any of those letters, Shai, Phi, Chai, Hori, Janja, Shima, or Ti, anywhere in the world, most likely it will be Coptic, unless it's Hori or Ti. For Hori, you have to switch for the rough breathing, which I don't expect you to know that. I will tell you if a word has Hori and it's not Coptic. And Ti, also, you're not expected to know that at this time in the course. And therefore, I will also tell you if the word that has T is not actually Coptic. So, this is very important. Whenever you see any of those letters, always assume Coptic unless I tell you it's not Coptic, which will only happen with Hori and T. And I will let you know if you ever in that situation. But most likely, more likely than not, you'll not be in that situation because I don't think I included those in any of your homeworks. So you could safely assume if it has any of those letters, it's all Coptic. But again, for the sake of completion, I don't want to teach you something wrong. I have to talk about the exceptions, so you can get like full theoretical knowledge and actually understand what's going on. Now comes for Greek. So Greek has certain letters that only show up in Greek words. Some of them are very straightforward and some of them have exceptions. So zeta is always a Greek word. The only exception to that is the word anzib, which is school. So to my knowledge and all the Coptic books I have looked at, this is the only word that has ever been mentioned as an exception for the zeta rule. So to our knowledge, based on all the books and how everyone teaches Coptic, anzib is the only exception to the zeta rule, where anzib is actually Coptic word. Every other single word in existence that has a zeta, as far as I'm concerned, would always be Greek. Now, gamma and delta, there is no exception. If you ever see a gamma, if you ever see a delta in a word, you're guaranteed it's a Greek word, not Coptic, Greek. So, zeta, with the exception of anzib, gamma and delta, always. And then, xc, except when it replaces kappa and sima together at the beginning of a word. You never have to worry about this. This is for the sake of completion. I will never give you a word where I actually trick you with an xc. That's actually replacing the kc, and therefore it's not Greek, it's Coptic. I will never do this to you, okay? And I don't care that you learn that rule. However, I do care that you know the exception to the xc is the word lex, which means curtain. So the word lex, like anzib for the zeta, lex is the exception for the xc, where lex is actually Coptic, not Greek. But every other word that has xc in it, unless it's lex, it will be Greek. Epsi, same idea, like the xc. If it replaces b and sima, then at the beginning of the word then, it becomes, it may be Coptic. But again, as far as I'm concerned, you could assume that epsi is always in Greek words, and there is no exceptions. And finally, this is the most important one. The most important one is epsilon. Epsilon, if it comes as the vowel I, like the word eos, this would be, let's write it out. So this first epsilon, it doesn't have an alpha or e before it, so it's not a v, which, by the way, if it's a v, it will not be a vowel, it will actually be a consonant. So it's not that case. It does not have omicron or o before it, therefore it will not take the u sound, which, like we remember, we said the omicron and epsilon together make one vowel sound. So in this case, it's not making that one vowel sound of ou, and so therefore it must be the only exception, which is an I. Else, if it's not this or this, it has to be an I. And remember, this is I as in dead, so it actually makes a little of an E sound. So this would be E. And then this iota, remember, it has a vowel before it, and it has a vowel after. And remember, with the iota rule, if it has a vowel before or after, in this case it has both before and after, so there is no way on earth it will be anything except a Y. Then the omicron, you put the O, and sima, like I said, is always an S, unless it's followed by me in a Greek word. In this case it's a Greek word, but it's not followed by me, therefore it's an S. So you put the whole word together and you get eos, which means sun. S-O-N, sun. So that word eos, or any other word that has epsilon as an I, i.e. if the epsilon is not preceded by alpha, E, or omicron, it must be an I, and therefore that word would be Greek, never Coptic. 100% of the time, guaranteed. Okay, so now let's recap quickly and call this lecture good. For Coptic words, heuristics, if it has shai, phi, chai, hori, jan, jet, shima, or t, it's always Coptic, unless I tell you otherwise. If we're in one of those two exception situations I talked about. Greek words, zeta, any word that has zeta is always Greek unless it's anzib. Gamma and delta, it's always a Greek word. Xc, always except for lex. Ipsi, always as well. And finally, the epsilon, which when it comes as the vowel I, then it will also be word of Greek origin. And we talked about the epsilon rule, and with that, I'm done with this part of the lecture. Thank you so much for watching, and see you next time.